Hello and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we explore those fascinating small moments, bold decisions, unexpected ripples that shape businesses, careers, identities, and entire lives. I'm Laura Barber, founder of The Ripple Impact, and after 20 years leading brand strategy in global giants, I'm now helping ambitious businesses, leaders, and founders turn human stories into brand growth. Each week, I sit down with incredible wave-maker guests to unpack the ripple moments that have shaped them. Moments that shift identities, change careers, open minds, and transform how we lead, live, and the lessons you can take to transform your business and your career. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Kim Happich, a globally minded people leader and organisational psychologist who's shaped talent, culture, and leadership. She's spent almost 13 years inside one of the world's biggest businesses, PepsiCo. Kim's story is powerful because it's rooted in something so human: curiosity, empathy, and the courage to actively participate in life, not just passively. From New York to Barcelona, across cultures, leadership philosophies, and identity shifts, Kim has lived what many would only talk about. Kim, welcome to the show. It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks, Laura. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Me too. Can you give our listeners a little window into your life and your career journey today and what brings you here today?
Yeah. So I grew up in the suburbs of New York City on a place called Long Island, which is where I'm sitting today. So I had the beauty of growing up in the shadow of one of the biggest cities, but in a little bit more of a small town feel near the water, near the coast. So always being near the water is something near and dear to my heart, and essentially have just wanted to learn about people and about why they do things and how people are different. And that has slowly taken me to different places and different experiences, being interested in people, studying psychology, studying people's psychology in a workplace setting, and then, getting a chance to work in big companies and organizations, and just how they all work together to drive for the same goal, as you might say, in corporate speak, and just getting a chance to do that in different places around the world.
Amazing. And what was it that sparked the curiosity and fascination with people and behavior? Was that formed by your university degree, or did you always have that? And that's what led to you ultimately taking the degree you did?
Yeah, I think that the curiosity was probably always there for whatever reason, just trying to understand why people did certain things that they did, understand different choices, you might say, or different behaviors, different ways that people acted, and wanted to know, why did you do that versus like maybe I would have wanted to do something different. What drove that? So I think just an intense desire to understand people. Yeah, it was probably always there, which helped inform what I wanted to study when I finally was able to go to uni.
Yeah. And you took quite an academic course, but it led you into a very practical route. Tell us the journey from a very practical study and actually finding, actually, it's not academia I want to go into. I want to follow a different path. Tell us that journey.
So, in the US, in 4-year degrees, you have to choose a major. And having this curiosity around people, a natural fit was psychology. In the US, it's not necessarily so easy to just go out and get a job with just a 4-year degree in psychology. If that's your field of study, you probably need to go on for more schooling, and you're typically needing to specialize in some facet. I was working in studying a little bit in social psychology while doing my 4-year degree. And through someone taking an interest in me, they introduced me to this world of industrial or organizational psychology, which is basically groups of people and how they interact with each other, but specific to a workplace setting. And it seems like a really cool blend of different interests. My dad has always been a small business owner throughout my life. And so understanding how business works, how businesses operate, and then being able to blend that with my own personal interests around people and curiosity and drivers and motivations. It seems like a really nice blend of things together. So I was able to go and get a master's degree in that field, industrial organizational psychology, at Hofstra University. And what's interesting to me, it's a field that's ripe and rich for lots of very formal academic study and research. There are many universities across the US and internationally that focus in that decision making, group dynamics, leadership, But what was ironic to me, and we need the research, we do need formal, dedicated, structured study. But what was ironic to me is the field doesn't exist without these real living, breathing companies. Thus, place
Mm.
setting does not exist without being in the real life, without practical application. And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't necessarily staying in academia. I wanted to be where these concepts come off the paper and you see
Yeah.
interaction in real life.
Yeah. And for anyone that's like going, I don't even know what that topic is, under the broadest umbrella of HR, tell
Yeah.
us how you explain it to someone who doesn't necessarily know what that is.
Sure. So there's a couple ways to describe it. Normally, these are going to be things that you might associate with your HR department. So
Mm.
they're going to be things like learning, adult learning, human development, how you build and create new skills. It's going to be things like what motivates people and what drives people. So could then also lead to the reward program that your company has and potentially even your compensation design. If you have, certain incentives that kick in only when you kind of hit certain thresholds or performance indicators, that is motivation. It's also culture. It's how people kind of create shared kind of way of doing things together. And these maybe sometimes very explicitly stated or sometimes very unstated, implicit forms of ways of working, behavioral norms, ways you expect to do things
Mm.
or expect to interact with people. So it ranges really far and wide from just how someone expects you to send an email versus pick up a phone, or it could be something as really formal as this is my leadership brand. And as the CEO, I want to do XYZ things. And it comes from this leadership theory. So it can be a lot of different things.
Yeah. And lovely that there's such a practical application of psychology, right? Because an organization is a living, breathing ecosystem of
Yeah.
people. And it's like that interaction and that, as you described it, as that culture and that curiosity of people and what motivates them in the context of an organization. So take us from university into the corporate world. Talk us through the journey.
Yeah. So while I was doing my master's and getting my graduate studies completed, I had the benefit of being able to work at a very small boutique consulting firm based in Greenwich, Connecticut. And through that firm, I was able to get exposure to a lot of different types of industries, a lot of different types of clients and companies and cultures, and very different types of projects from executive coaching and, leadership development, 160-degree feedback, change management, development of kind of talent to be ready for the next leadership ranks. And it was a great learning experience. One, because I was getting a chance to learn very directly and intimately from someone who had been in the industry for many years and learn directly from her experience and expertise. But I was also getting a chance to see how different types of companies chose to do different things, what their business mission was, and then therefore what they chose to invest in from a talent or a people perspective. The two things must go hand in hand. But it also showed me, not just through the breadth of learning experience, but it also made me realize that I wanted to work in one company rather than take the consulting route, which is also pretty common in the field. And the reason being is I wanted to know that if I was working on something or making a recommendation, suggesting that people do things differently, I wanted to know how it was going. I wanted to know if what I
Yeah.
recommended was actually helpful or not helpful, ineffective or effective. And most times when you're consulting, you really don't get the opportunity to know
No.
the results in that type of way. You might be lucky if you get invited back for another project 6 or 9 months later, and maybe they let you do a follow-up survey, right? But that's not the nature of how that model works, right? The nature of consulting is you come in for a very specific purpose and a very specific objective, and you
Mhm.
provide a ton of focus and expertise on that one thing, and then off you go. And I just wanted to feel that I had a bit more skin in the game for whatever I was recommending. If I was going to be suggesting that people are making different choices or doing things differently, I wanted to do that for the better. I didn't want to be frivolous with other people's work lives, let's say.
Yeah, and be connected to the business and close to the action and actually see the implementation of the recommendations you're making and then maybe tweak it and pivot and change depending on how it lands and how it doesn't, and actually being super close to the business. And actually, ultimately,
Yeah,
that's a role that you ended up taking then.
that's right. That's right. And so when I was ready to leave this experience at this boutique consulting firm, I was looking for what's the right type of company to go work for. Having grown up and lived in the broader New York area and studying in this field, PepsiCo was a company that was very top of mind for multiple reasons. One is specific to my field. They were known for really taking to heart and understanding the value of, investing in your people, both from a development standpoint, but how you apply these concepts to really make an environment in which people thrive, because people thriving is how you get better business results. And so, getting a chance to get people to work in a collective way, and how do you make them the most effective at doing that together? That was interesting to me, a company that understood and saw the value without needing to me single-handedly needed to prove it, right? I had a
Mhm.
deep interest in working in an organization where they already saw that the value was there, because then you can do some really cool things if people trust that there's value in it. And the other reason why I was particularly interested at PepsiCo was it was a globally minded company. It operates in over 100 countries around the globe, bringing that portfolio of products from a food and beverage perspective to consumers in different types of markets with different types of tastes. And I liked the idea of a company that operated in multiple places and had to be flexible enough to operate in different cultures with different ways of doing things. So that was interesting to me. When I was looking to make that first step early on in my career, there wasn't a specific role that was specialized in my area of organizational psychology. It often gets called
Mhm.
talent management in
Yeah.
big companies. So if you don't see organizational psychologist in your company's structure, don't worry, we might still be there hidden under talent management. And that role didn't exist at that moment. Those roles were filled, and the team was staffed at the time. But there was an HR business partner role available. And so I was more interested in making sure that I was working for the right type of company than a very specific role when I was early on in my career, because I knew I was going to need lots of different
Mm.
experiences. And so by doing that, by like taking the more broadening, just making sure that I'm gaining as much experience and knowledge as I can, I wound up getting a chance to work and partner directly with some of these line leaders. And I loved it. I loved understanding how the business worked, how we made money, how we operated day to day, what it really took to put product on the shelf or put product in our customers' hands in their small restaurants in the neighborhood, and how supporting from an HR perspective, a broad people perspective, how that enabled us to, grow the business, run it well, effectively, and give people a place to show up for work where they were going to be happy with how they were choosing to spend their time. We spend a lot of time at work, so if we can make it a little bit better, then I think that's a better outcome for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I love the term organizational psychology. I think that's so much more
Mm.
powerful than talent management, because talent management just feels like such a narrow field relative to
Mm.
organizational psychology and how people think, how people interact, how people move metaphorically and physically around the world. And I think that's such a better title. Let's rebrand everybody to be called organizational psychologists, because it's so much more interesting. I remember at the time, because obviously we worked together at PepsiCo, some wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful years together. And I remember, and I'd had the privilege of having HR business partners in the past, but I
Mm.
remember people in, the organization saying, "Why do we need a HR business partner?" And like, I get it because I'd seen it. But I think if people are called organizational psychologists, it becomes a lot more intuitive of why you need a HR business
Mm.
partner, a part of the organization, because it's much bigger than talent management. It's much bigger than HR processes and systems and appraisals and rewards and objective settings and these pivotal moments throughout the year, which are really, really important. But as you talk about it, there's a curiosity of culture and people and connection and
Mm.
interconnectedness. And that's what organizational psychology is. And that's what's really, really powerful.
Yeah. Well, we will have you help us on our branding journey as we get back there.
Very happy to help. There is so much power in what you've talked about, which is the
Mm.
connection, the communication, the interconnectedness, and the psychology of people. It just happens to be in a workplace, and how
That's
you build incredible teams, incredible leaders, incredible systems to allow people to be the best they possibly can be, allow them to stretch and grow, challenge themselves, challenge others, but in a way that's really effective and really works with that particular organization. Because so many companies are so different. They can be selling the same things, but they are like chalk and cheese. And that's
Yeah.
down to culture, and that's down to
Yeah.
people, and that's the way they operate. And that's the field that you're in, which is very fascinating.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It leads me to a little bit of a different I'm remembering a different experience here of the first time I worked truly outside of the US. I had had roles based in the US that were had global responsibility, and you get exposure to different
Mm.
ways of doing things in those experiences, but you're still in the comfort of your home culture. You're
Yeah.
not necessarily forced to reckon with being different in that way. But when you take a choice to move outside of your home culture, whether you are on a small trip or whether you're choosing to move or whether you are working in a different culture other than your own, that experience of coming directly face to face with being and the outsider, for lack of a better way to describe right now, versus the core, the norm of the environment that you're in that
Mm.
moment, it forces you to like take some stock and reflection of, okay, well, maybe it's not necessarily just my way is the right way. Clearly there's a whole group of people that decided that this is the right way, this is their choice of what way that they want to interact. So why is that, and where does that come from? A lot of times there's a sense of either different is scary or different is not my
Mm.
own or
Mhm.
mine is better. And I think when you have to really understand how you're different because you are one versus the sea of people around you wherever you might be, you have to ask some questions about why people have chosen to act in that particular way.
And you've had many roles in PepsiCo already, right? Because you've been there just shy of 13 years.
Um,
But moving to Barcelona, as you said, was a huge ripple moment for you. And not just a change
What?
in country from you moving to the US to Spain, but actually a bit of a shift in perspectives and emotional muscle and almost identity. And when we talked last time, you talked about you were a different person before you left and when you
Mm,
came back, and having such a pivotal role on you and your outlook and how you operate. Talk us through the move, because it's such a big thing to
mhm.
move countries. Even if you've got the support of an organization behind you to move role, it was
Yeah.
completely out of your comfort zone. It was out of context
Yeah.
of what you'd done before. As you said, forced you to grow and made you quite vulnerable. Can you talk us through the move and how that's impacted you?
I think so the choice to move is one that I think for me seemed like a natural progression of this curiosity, right? And
Mm.
before starting my professional career, can remember maybe as a young teen chatting with my cousin about, we were going to do this or that. We were going to, do this or that for our career. We were going to live in this place or that place. Like we had visions of where we were going to go. And while I didn't necessarily like have Barcelona picked out, there was always this
Mm.
concept of like, there's so much to the world. If my curiosity about people leads me to wanting to know more and asking questions and then wanting to know how this person's different from that person, there's this natural expansion to that, right? The more you ask questions, the more that you're curious, you're suddenly there's just so many more other things to go do. Anyone who's ever described themselves as like a wanderluster knows that like your travel
Yeah.
list just gets longer, it never gets shorter, right? So in a similar vein, that curiosity like also led to me wanting to experience that curiosity in a really extreme way. I wanted to live and work in a place that was different from my own. I wanted to intimately know how people do things differently. And I don't know that that there's many places I would have said no to, but Barcelona was a place that, was super interesting to me just based off of the history, the culture, the art there. And it also seemed accessible in a sense where I also spoke Spanish. So it seemed a little bit easier to make that jump and be immersed in a different language as well. I would say that curiosity was really the driving force. And at that moment in my life, I was, I think, in my mid 20s and was going off on my own, untethered. My family were sad to have me far away, but supportive of what I wanted to go do. And so I went off on my own. And I, of course, had colleagues that were there, but I didn't really know anybody. I had been fortunate throughout my life in being able to build social circles from different places or settings in my life. And picking up all at once and moving to another place where you don't necessarily bring those connections with you, you have to ask yourself what it's like to build new connections all from scratch, all at once, versus when you are doing it in the same geographic area that you've broadly lived in before, it just seems additive. It just seems expansive versus like a whole reset or restart seems a little daunting. One, do I actually know how to strike up a conversation that feels natural with a stranger? Like, what do I say? What do I ask? What do I say about myself? How do I define myself? Like, what are the things that I use to describe myself? It causes a lot of reflection and really coming to terms with and looking in the mirror at like your values as well. And what are the things you want to spend your time on? And what are the things that are important to you? And therefore, how do you then go finding those new connections in a new space? Where do you even go to make a new friend when you're an adult? Like even to know where to start can sometimes be daunting. And so I think that was the biggest thing, the biggest part of the experience for me was really who do I identify as this individual person now, separate from the support structures and the home culture that I had built it in. And there's both a openness, I think, to that, but also to the point that you brought up before, a fear of vulnerability. Like, am I choosing the person as people knew me that was incrementally and not necessarily actively like built in that sense? Do I want to be the same? And do I just carry that over? Or do I take the option, the choice of now I just want to be a new person? And who might that be? I do think I have growth. I have grown from who I left. I do feel more affirmed in the things that are important to me and those values because I've really had to reckon with and like make an active choice in that moment of, okay, like, is this who I want to be? Is this what I value doing? Is this what I want to, is this how I want to show up in the world? And only by saying yes or no and writing that in again in this new definition of who I was, can I say like with conviction that those values are still there.
Yeah. Almost a moment of identity reevaluation.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I would say reevaluation. And when you reevaluate, if you are still making the same choices, they feel stronger, they feel more solidified.
Yeah. Wow. So a real solidification of self and identity and what's meaningful and what you hold value in. One
Yeah.
of the things that you talked about when we first chatted that really struck with me was this thought of growth doesn't come from just exposure. So you moved to Spain, you were living in Barcelona, and yes, there's a lot of growth that can come from that, but actually the growth came from not just being there, but choosing to engage. And I
Yes.
love that thought. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I've maybe seen this a bit more and been reflecting on it a bit more now, having come back to home culture and still choosing to go out and travel. I think, especially now, global travel has become more accessible, cheaper, easier to do. And that's a great thing because people are getting out and exposed to more things. However, we also now have devices that work wherever we are versus if you were traveling, let's call it 15, 20 years ago. You didn't have global data. You didn't have your social media that was still there or available, or Google that still
Yeah.
worked in your native language with your saved preferences still in there to find whatever spot you're trying to go explore at. And so through that lack of access, lack of connectivity to the home culture, you had to go out into this unknown place and really be present and kind of experience with your senses what's in front of your eyes. Like, where does your curiosity bring you? Like, what smells do you like lead you into that next restaurant versus curated list from a TripAdvisor influencer that's giving you their top 10 recommendations, which are really the top 10 recommendations from where whatever home culture you come from, right? Preferences selected for a particular taste. You had to just go with what was around you or ask questions to people that were around you versus now you can keep that shell, that bubble with you even, and you're just physically changing the place that you were in. You can still watch the same TV shows when you're back in your hotel room in the evening. You're not forced to kind of listen to alternate language, just whatever came through in the hotel television, dubbed 70s sitcom repeats, whatever they might be. Now, more than ever, even though it's accessible, you're not necessarily challenging the way that you are thinking because there are too many comforts that still come with you. again, that accessibility is at least giving people some exposure. But the real beauty of being able to go out and experience other cultures is choosing to not keep those comforts, right? Is
Yeah.
choosing to go put yourself in someone else's shoes and see through their eyes, see through their lens. What are the tastes that maybe like is not something you've ever tasted before? So maybe that first initial bite is a little shocking, but maybe after the third bite, you're like, oh, actually, okay, that's a little bit unique. I wasn't expecting that, but there's something to that. My brain keeps going back to it. We can be in places and still not make any differences or force any differences from ourselves. So I
Yes.
think that true curiosity, there needs to be, this very clear, active choice of I want to engage. And it could be for many different reasons. I like difference, I like variety, or it could be that seek to understand. When we have curiosity in particular and this active choice to be uncomfortable through this place of seek to understand, that's where connection happens, right? That's
Yeah.
where I can understand more about you and your background and your values. And I think it really, by able to understand where people are coming from, that's when the most beautiful things can happen. You see it in terms of collaborations with artists or intersectional research with different academics and scientists. The most exciting experiences, the most exciting new art, innovation, works, whether they be literature or otherwise, food experiments. Think of how exciting people get when there's fusion restaurants that come to life, right? So the
Yeah.
most exciting parts of human experience really come when we can understand someone else's point of view and somehow meet in the middle. And it's just, I find that that's the richness of people and beauty in human life.
Yeah, I love that thought. The idea of that active participation is where the connection and the engagement really happens because you can look and not see. You can
Yes.
listen and not hear. You can
Yeah.
physically be somewhere, but not really experience it, not really be
Yeah.
present, not really tuning in to what's happening around you. And, just tiny things like you go to concerts these days and everyone just has the phone up and they're watching
Yeah.
it through their phone. Like, wouldn't it be
Yeah.
nice if we all put our phones down and we actively present to learn about perspectives and people and culture and behaviors? Because I think unless you really fully immerse, you're just a viewer.
I find that the moments that I remember more, the experiences, the memories, the weekends that are stick out for me are the ones where there was doing involved.
Yeah.
And that doing can be as simple as a conversation, right? You don't need to be
Yeah.
jumping off a bridge every single, new experience to have a memory. It can be like, just a really deep, intimate conversation with someone that you hadn't met before or experienced in a different way. It's not the places where I was just viewing through my phone or following someone else's map or list to go do, or just watching whatever kind of TV of someone else going and exploring. The things that I take away most are where I was actively involved in the doing, in the participating, in the choice itself. It's so much more exciting when you feel like you've discovered something new that you weren't anticipating versus just, going to someone else's Instagram list of the restaurants you should try in this very populated, tourist destination, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And as you said, like the richest human experiences being in those moments where you're choosing to participate. I
That's
love
right.
that thought. How
That's
has
right.
the moving of cultures, so moving from US to Spain, how has that shifted your perspective and have those different cultures had an impact on you, your style, but also your leadership? What have you taken with you from those moments and from that stage in your life?
So yes, it's a great question because it set my mind in multiple different places all at once. Have different cultures influenced my leadership style? I think the answer is yes. And it comes back to, I had a curiosity, but I didn't necessarily know what drove people just yet. Having lived and worked in Europe, and I'm going to speak to like Europe more broadly here versus just Barcelona or Spain. Even within Europe, there's implicit ways of understanding. And I
Right.
find this comes out a lot in communication styles. A
Mhm.
really good way to understand what people value in a culture is to also see like how they choose to speak to each other and what information gets highlighted or what does not get spoken about directly. And so, having worked in a role where I was responsible for working with people all across Europe, from very Eastern Europe to also Turkey to the UK to the Netherlands to the Mediterranean, they all have wildly different communication styles. And it comes from a place that I have found, like when you understand why people speak the way that they do, on like what those cultures value, right?
Mm.
In a place like the UK where there's a lot of indirect communication, right? There's always a meaning
Mhm.
behind the meaning. And you're like, well, why not just speak plainly?
That's
Um,
interesting. I don't mean it's interesting.
exactly, exactly. It's, oh, did you really want to do that? I'm going to have you question that suggestion. It comes from a place that I have found of caring about people and wanting harmony, right?
Mm.
Versus on the exact opposite side, Dutch communication style, people from the Netherlands are super direct with their
Mhm.
communication. And if you receive that as a British speaker, you're going to say, well, this person cares nothing about me. Like, why would they be so harsh? Do they not care about my feelings at all? Versus the Dutch speaker is thinking, why wouldn't I take such care to let you know exactly my thoughts so that way you can fix it or do differently or how you can improve. It actually comes from a place of care, but the thought about how care shows up is actually quite
Mhm.
different. And so if you were to just let that interaction happen on its own, both people leave very frustrated, but really they wanted the same thing. They wanted
Yeah.
a good outcome, which they both have a vision for in their head, and they both care about the other person and don't want to hurt each other's feelings, but both feelings are hurt, right? So I think by having to be the person that comes from the outside, I had to ask a lot of questions to understand what other people took at face value or just had an
Right.
assumption that those were the way that things happened, right? That just is. So you don't necessarily challenge or you don't question the
Mm.
why.
Mhm.
And so that taught me a really valuable lesson in the sense that by not understanding what's driving the way that someone does something, I can make my own assumption of the value that they're placing on it or their an attribution, to use a psychological term to come back to our organizational psychologist, attribution of like what they were trying to do with that. Who am I to place judgment on what they were thinking and didn't say out loud? Not for me to judge someone's intent. And so only by asking questions, only by understanding the way that these communications come out, could I appreciate that and then actually create an environment, a work product, a project that we're working on together where everyone's values can be met and what
Mm.
shared goals can come together in that way. And that's really the lesson I take to come back to that question on like leadership is I don't ever want to make an assumption about what someone else's
Mm.
was attempting
Mhm.
to do if it's not spoken out loud, right? One, take that assumption of positive intent is the first. Assumption of positive intent, curiosity is the second. And for me, this is then turned into really clear and explicit communication because I can't assume that like my communication patterns are the same for anybody else. And so I'm just going to
Yeah.
be very plain with how I speak so that way everyone knows.
It's such a lovely structure because you were almost the cultural neutral as an American within Europe and seeing all these different nuances and all these different styles and communication. It's interesting because you don't often see your own culture because it's so
Mhm.
ingrained in your psyche, your behaviors, just what's normal and what's been
Yes.
constructed for you that you don't see it. So when you move countries, as you said, it's easier to observe these things and you can naively or beautifully ask
Mhm.
questions. Whereas when you sit in your own culture, where people don't often do that. So just the thought of simply asking questions, but to understand, not to respond, and
Mhm.
starting with this element of positive intent is such a simple construct to make sure that that communication is really, really clear and you're understanding where that person is coming from before you then take assumptions and take action as a result, before you even understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. And we're using the difference between American and European right now, and we're acknowledging the nuance in European. I would say there's those subcultures and there's that nuance
Oh,
within
yeah.
American culture as well, right? So
Yeah.
having grown up as a proud New Yorker, I've also worked in the South for a number of years, multiple stints, being based in Florida and covering a large part of the geographic South. And there's a lot of times where on first meeting me, folks assume that I'm a little bit brash or, rough
Yeah.
around the edges, or New Yorkers in general, Northerners in general are
Mhm.
rough and rude and don't care. And I think yeah, there may be a rough edge to it. There may be a crudeness to it, but it comes from a place of, I care about you so much. I don't want you to make a fool of yourself. So I'm going to tell you exactly how you're showing up.
Yeah.
So it's that same nuance and need to kind of have that assumption of positive intent and
Mhm.
curiosity
Mhm.
holds true even within subcultures of a bigger, broader culture.
Yeah. It's a lovely thought because there's so many subcultures, as you said, within countries, within states, within counties, within cities almost. There's so much nuance that goes on. And culture is such a beautifully rich thing. But also, it's dangerous to have a brushstroke of people to say, oh, you're from England and therefore, or you're American, therefore. That it's easy to do that, isn't it? But I think there's so much nuance. And often what's presented on the surface actually often isn't what you'd expect either. Just because someone comes from a certain place, it doesn't mean that they line up to the stereotypes that exist. So get into that,
Sure.
the deep richness, as you said, the curiosity and the empathy for that
Yeah,
individual and for that person is often where the power really lies. How do
that's
you
right.
see curiosity, empathy, culture, humility really showing up in leadership? Have you seen it changed over the years?
So I think there are concepts that we talk about now with regularity, but
Mm,
just because we talk about them doesn't necessarily mean that we're always really good at practicing them. So I do think that we are saying like, hey, let's make sure that people are being empathetic or that you're understanding, but in times of pressure, which there's a lot going on no matter what arena of the world you're living in, whether it be economic, whether it be geopolitical, whether it be cultural, there's a lot of just change going on.
mm,
Change can feel scary. And I think sometimes when we feel these moments of pressure or we feel uncertain about the future, people in general tend to come inwards and are less curious and are less willing to be vulnerable. And so we talk about it. Yes. Thankfully, I think we've got tools to kind of recognize, acknowledge, help encourage these
mm,
positive leadership behaviors for sure. But I think right now in this moment, there needs to be a very active choice to turn that on and do what's not the instinct, what's not the normal human evolutionary
yeah.
reaction. It takes quite a lot of effort to still choose to be open, curious, empathetic of what others are
Mhm.
going through that might be different from ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you said, in a world that we're kind of built for convenience, aren't we? And speed, and AI
Mhm.
has helped and hindered that, depending on which way you look at it. But
Mhm.
in the way, in a world of speed and automation and quick connections and echo chambers as well of society, and especially when COVID happened and everyone went very, very insular, we've kept on to a little bit of that somehow. And this idea of staying open and curious and staying human is super, super powerful. People that don't have the benefit of the travel and the business experience that you've had moving countries is such a powerful one that not everyone gets to
Mhm.
experience. And for some people that aren't even able to travel, how would you
Mm.
tell them to be open and curious and build their empathetic muscle that don't have the ability of moving to Spain and experience the glory of the Spanish culture? How would you tell people to really build their curiosity and empathy?
I think there's so many ways that you can practice this very close to home and in your everyday life, right? At the end of the day, building that curiosity and empathy is just by having a conversation with someone who either you wouldn't normally have or who has a different experience from yourself. So, for example, there have been like great projects in schools where kids go and spend time with folks that are in elder care homes or assisted living facilities who either don't have visitors very often or maybe they don't have family to come and spend time with them, and just that intergenerational difference as well, practicing that. No one, I'm pretty sure that there are many opportunities to volunteer in your local community in all facets, whether it's
Mhm.
having a conversation with someone who may be in from a different generation, whether it's the person who hands you your morning coffee on your way to work every day, or whether it's choosing to volunteer for whatever care that matters to you, whether it be a local animal shelter or a local food bank or pantry, just taking the moment to engage in conversation and or just experience someone else's experience, life that may be different than your own that is a huge way to just build the empathy muscle and the curiosity muscle. You never know what stories you may hear from what path people have taken to kind of get to that moment. There's a lot of interesting people out there.
Yeah, and being open to newness as well in every element of
Yeah.
your life, and being able to strike up a conversation with a stranger and learn
Yeah.
something and maybe challenge your perceptions and judgments and preconceptions of people and their lives and what they're doing. So I love that thought. That's so lovely.
Try to join a new club. Go learn a new activity.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So we've talked about individual curiosity and empathy and learning and being open to new experiences and cultures and people and challenge your assumptions and asking questions with positive intent and really listening. What future ripples do you think leaders need to pay attention to? So we talked about the individual, but for leaders and organizations and businesses in a world where we're becoming a lot more fragmented and sometimes arguably more disconnected, what
Yeah.
ripples do you see in leadership then and advice that you would give to businesses?
I think the most practical advice I could give is, especially during moments of change, there's so much that is on the leader's plate, trying to build the next strategy, handle complex negotiation. And there are moments where you're kind of having to do your own tasks and let your team go and do their activities, making sure that you're still paying attention to how your team are doing and some of these soft things. If someone is
Mm,
in a moment of distress, one, they may not even realize it themselves. They may be so wrapped in what's going on that they may not know that they're showing up or behaving any differently. Two, I don't necessarily know that sometimes people know how to like ask for or talk about it or say like, hey, this needs to be different. So I think the responsibility for the leader is to, one, do you see people behaving in a way that you're not used to seeing them behave? Are people being more short in meetings, having less patience, or getting a bit more insular in their thinking versus exploratory in their thinking? Making sure that you're still challenging yourself to check in and look at those
mm,
soft signals or behavioral indicators from your team. And it is your responsibility to also create the space for and introduce and have that conversation if something does need to be different, right? We are responsible for creating the environment in which others feel safe having those conversations and being vulnerable and having the curiosity and the seek to understand
mhm.
conversations. So one, can you kind of spot if folks are needing a little bit more support than normal? And two, are you really creating the space that promotes people to be able to have that exploration, that curiosity, that, empathy for each other, for others, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice. And obviously, this element of being really human in your leadership. But I love your thought of really tuning in on observing what's going on with your teams and checking in. But also, as you said, like watching the behaviors and how are people changing and they're becoming more insular versus exploratory. I love this thought of being much more tuned in to your team and what's going on. And that takes time and that takes effort. And it also takes a
Yeah.
deep listening as well to your teams and what's happening. And I think that's so, so powerful. My final
Yeah.
question that we ask everyone. So we call our guests wave makers because they're making waves on the industry, on people, on lives, and on businesses. What advice would you give to aspiring wave makers?
So one is probably not going to be a surprise based off of the theme of this conversation, and the other will probably be a build from there. So the first is definitely be as curious as you want to be. You never know what new interest or what new insight learning that you may have that comes not just from the first question but the fifth or the sixth question. You don't
Mhm.
really know where that line of questions is going to bring you, and you may have a totally new experience that is changes your outlook, and you didn't even know that it was coming from where you first started out. So be as curious as you want to be and as you can. The only other thing I can say is don't be afraid to do something that feels slightly uncomfortable, because that is where both vulnerability and empathy come from when you're interacting with others. But that discomfort, that unwillingness to be in the uncomfortable, stretch outside the comfort zone is how people are really thinking. That's really where the growth comes from. And so you become a stronger individual, whether it is just reaffirming kind of like your own beliefs, your own values, or whether it is truly kind of giving you a new perspective and giving you a different skill than what you had before. You're not going to build those skills without doing the uncomfortable thing. So be curious and don't be afraid to be uncomfortable.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Kim, thank you so much, truly, for your story. Your story is a reminder that growth is not an accident, empathy is not passive, and becoming who you are meant to be is often found when we step into the unfamiliar, we step into the uncomfortable with deep curiosity, with deep courage, and with deep empathy. So thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. It makes me want to travel the world and continue to learn and grow. So thank you, you've inspired me. For everyone listening and watching, remember the ripple starts when you choose to engage. For everyone looking to elevate their human story of their brand or their business, please get in touch with us at The Ripple Impact so we can see how we can help your business grow. That is a wrap on this Ripple episode. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in weekly for more bold voices and inspiring waymaker guests just like Kim. I'm Laura Barber. This is The Ripple Impact. We will see you all next week. Kim, thank you so much. It's been wonderful as always. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
For everyone else, we'll see you next week. Bye for now.